Damian Collins.
Thank you, Chair. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member and the Member for Eltham, my honourable friend from our time working on the Select Committee together. It is 10 years since, as a newly elected Member of Parliament and a new member of the DCMS Select Committee, there was a debate in Westminster Hall considering football governance in the wake of the financial collapse of a number of big clubs. And the room was packed for that, and on the basis of the attendance of the debate and the impassioned speeches given, the then chair of the Select Committee, my right honourable friend, the member for Malden, initiated that inquiry into football governance that reported in 2011 and then again in 2013. During my time as chair of the Select Committee, we looked at football governance in the context of player welfare, in the case of Eni Aluko's complaint against the Football Association. We looked at the collapse of Bury Football Club just before the general election last year. This has been a running debate for many, many years in this place, and it's a debate that is so far unresolved. I think we should be really clear why we have this argument and complaint about football governance. What is it that we're seeking to reform when we talk about improving the governance of the game? We want to see financial sustainability of clubs because clubs are community assets. They temporarily belong to a businessman or an owner, but then someone else will acquire them. These are clubs that have been going for over 100 years, most of them. They've survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and every crisis this country has faced since, and they keep on going throughout that, at the centre of their communities. We want to make sure that fans have a voice in the way that their game is run. We want to make sure that player welfare is central to the administration of the game, and there are good systems of redress and processes of complaint. The one thing we learned from Eni Aluko's case against the Football Association was there were really no proper processes for someone taking a complaint for unfair treatment against the Football Association. And we want to respect the fact that these are community assets, very important to the community, far beyond putting on matches on match days. They're involved in all sorts of community support through player development, community welfare, adult education and training, and they are incredibly valuable to the communities that they serve. That is what we're trying to preserve. But why is it that the game is so badly run? It's because it is so fractured. We believe that the Football Association is the national governing body of the sport. Unlike almost any other sport, the national governing body is not the financially dominant player within football in this country. In most sports it is. The national governing body and the revenue it gets from the England national team provides the bulk of the revenue that sport enjoys. That is not the case in football, it is the Premier League. When we talk about the football family, in some ways, and I know the Minister often talks about the football family, as the Secretary of State does as well, it's a belief that these are a community of clubs that are interrelated, they play competitions against each other, they all sit ultimately under the Football Association, so they must be interlinked. But of course they're not. The Premier League has its own set of rules, the Football League has its own set of rules, the FA takes responsibility for the National League, and they all have their own rules and procedures and they're run in their own way. The revenue from broadcasting is negotiated separately by the Premier League from the Football League. I think a bad decision the Football League made many years ago to do that, but nevertheless, that is the case. Clubs in the Premier League, particularly in the lower part of the Premier League, consider that they are competing against clubs in the Championship, particularly clubs that might get promoted and take their place. That is the reason why it is so difficult to get a financial settlement for football during the COVID crisis from football, because football doesn't behave like a family. Football behaves as different entities competing against each other. Indeed, a Premier League club in a typical season will play under Premier League rules in the Premier League, will play under FA rules in the FA Cup, will play under Football League rules in the League Cup, and will probably also hold a UEFA licence in case they're in or wishing to qualify for UEFA competitions. And all of them have their own different rules and procedures. And there's no one that is bringing it together and no one that is ultimately responsible. There are certain rules that are put in place to try and make sure that clubs are run sustainably, but whenever there's a crisis, we see how ineffective those rules are. And the case of Bury Football Club, like other clubs, demonstrate that. If the clubs were made to trade within the rules of the leagues they play in, most clubs wouldn't go bust. The fact is that they don't. And they don't because no one checks. There's no requirement to produce accounts in real time. There's no requirement for or ability for the FA or the league to inspect and audit those clubs to make sure they're not overspending on salaries and they're being run in a financially sustainable way. When there is a problem, what we see is there's not a regulator that steps in to say that club is being run in an unsustainable way in breach of the rules and we're going to intervene to put it back on track. What happens is the club is allowed to be run in a bad way, often by a bad owner, until such point as it goes bust. And then the role of the league is to make sure that if the club doesn't come out of administration, that club is suitably punished. Well, in the case of Bury, I remember when I visited Bury, in the case of other clubs as well, the first cry of the fans is always, why didn't someone intervene earlier? And the fact is there's nobody to do it. There's nobody that has the power and the authority to do it. Many times people pray in aid of the owners and directors test that keeps bad owners out of the game and out of clubs. The fact is there is really no such test. Massimo Cellino demonstrated this, someone who was a convicted fraudster from Italy, but whose conviction was considered to be spent under English company law, and the Football League had no more right to stop him being a director of that club than they had to stop him being the director of any company under UK company law. There is no special test. Even if there was, the Football League doesn't have the resources to enforce it. And in the case of Bury, the last owner of Bury when it was in the Football League took over the club without having to demonstrate proof of funds or being subjected to any test at all. Now, why is it that things are allowed to be this bad? It's principally because there's no national governing body or regulator overseeing all of these rule books and how they're enforced, the clubs effectively do it themselves. The Premier League is run by the 20 clubs in the Premier League, plus the league itself, which has one share. They make decisions collectively, and they make decisions without the involvement of the Football Association. The Football League is run in the same way, by the 72 chairmen of the clubs. And they're not that interested necessarily in intervening to help each other. They're competing against each other, and they are run in that way, which is unsustainable. And no one is ultimately in control. And that is why the rules don't get enforced properly. Now, there is an argument, a very strong argument to say we should have a regulator with statutory powers that's got the right to insist on access to financial records, to make sure clubs are playing within the rules, that has, as Ofcom has when broadcasting licences are issued, that has a discretionary power to tell an owner that can't demonstrate proof of funds or that they're suitable or credible, that they can't take over that club. Now, we've called for that before, and I would hope in this fan-led review that was in our manifesto and that the government is committed to, that we say that actually that fan-led review should give a view on whether we have an independent regulator with statutory powers, to be at the centre of the game, even if all that regulator does is make sure that the leagues properly enforce their own rules and have access to clubs' finances to make sure that they are doing that. There are some people who say, well, I think you can't have a statutory regulator because FIFA rules don't allow it. That is not true. The FIFA rules have still made it possible in Spain in 2015 for the Spanish government to legislate to say Barcelona and Real Madrid couldn't sell their TV rights separately. In France, the national governing body is a statutory body, effectively given a licence by the French government in order to carry out its responsibilities. That's France, the country of the world football champions at the moment. In Germany, there are rules on club ownership, which require 50 plus 1% of the club to be owned by the fans and the community. And all clubs are licensed by the German Football League, and that can withdraw the licence if the club is trading in breach of the rules. And so other countries do this already. There is no reason why, under FIFA rules, we would be sanctioned if we created a regulator with statutory powers. And I believe that is what we should be looking at in this review. The government, I believe, has a great deal of leverage at the moment because football needs its help. There is still no deal between the Premier League and the Football League to provide financial support for clubs. As many members here know, the Football League has warned that clubs will go bust. I know the Minister and his colleagues say, well, the Premier League have said they've guaranteed to bail out clubs that go bust. Well, at the moment, there's not enough money available to do that. Indeed, the tax liabilities of the Football League clubs are now probably around £100 million that it owes the Treasury. So the government already has skin in the game here because it is owed money as other people are owed money too. The government is in a position, I believe, where if it was to put money on the table alongside money from the Football League, it could do so with strings attached and demand reform, proper financial accountability conducted by an independent regulatory body. And I think that should be at the heart of the proposals considered in the fan-led review, and is what football needs now. So rather than having a series of warring competitions, competing against each other and fighting against each other, we have a structure with a proper governing body at the heart that has powers to take action against clubs that are being run in a bad and unsustainable way. The COVID crisis has challenged so many aspects of our life, and it's exposed the systemic weaknesses in the governance of football in this country, and it gives us the opportunity now to put that right.